Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. We are going to speak about ancient kingdoms today. I'm in my official ancient kingdom chair. I have my official ancient kingdom necklace on, retro from the 60s, and we are going to talk about some important kingdoms in what we now call the Middle East. But first, this is Latina Literati. What we call the Middle East is only called the Middle East because England decided that it was the Middle East as opposed to the Far East in terms of their colonial possessions. And so really, if you think about it, that European colonial powers should get to name sections of the world is a little bit, how can I put this? It is not how it should be. In other words, we should all be able to name the areas in which we live and not have it imposed on us by colonial settler powers, right? So I'm going to refer to the area as Mesopotamia, which is the original anthropological term used for the area. It's a very ancient area. It's where we think many of the parts or segments of our civilization today are derived from. So we are a complex mixture of many things that came from this area. And so I think it's important to take a look at it. And that's what we're going to do today. So let's get right into it. Modern archaeology and anthropology places the development of the first community settlements where agriculture is traded at about 12,000 years ago. Let me repeat that. About 12,000 years ago, people started to have sufficient agricultural products and other products like pottery and home woven goods so they could take care of their own needs. They could pay tribute to their leader because even in those days, it was recognized that you had to give something to the leaders, a tribute, tax, whatever you'd like to call it. And so at about 12,000 years ago, these communities had sufficient irrigation and agricultural means to start trading along rivers and trade routes. And so that's really how you begin to be able to have bigger and bigger places, bigger towns, or even what would develop into cities. And we're talking about the areas that we now call Turkey, Greater Syria, and Iraq. So you have these very important rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates that were used for trade up and down along the waterways. Really important to be able to, even in small crafts, be able to go to the next town to trade. And that's the basis of the economic activity at that time, 12,000 years ago. Pretty amazing. So you have what were called Akkadians and Sumerians come up with a cuneiform system of writing. It's the precursor to our own system of writing. The concept of sounds, putting together words that then mean something, grammar, and all of the different elements of modern writing, we have in at least written form from the time of the Akkadians and Sumerians, at least from that time. That's what's been able to come down to us. There may have been something that existed even before that, but what we have right now in terms of archaeological, anthropological evidence is the Akkadian and Sumerian cuneiform language. And so the clay tablets and the papyrus and the different things that they use to write on that have survived unbelievably thousands and thousands and thousands of years, mostly because it's a very dry desert climate. We have been able to discover a lot about those civilizations, sufficient enough to say that these are some of the first what we would term as larger civilizations, maybe even empires. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today, ancient kingdoms and empires. So the first empire that we're going to talk a little bit about is the Akkadian Empire. So we're talking about 2400 BC. The empire was established by a man with the name of Sargon the Great. This may seem very familiar to you, but his origin story is that his priestess mother placed him on a river. He was found by a gardener and was raised, and then came back to become the ruler. So this is an origin story that is really popular in these ancient kingdoms, and you'll see it again and again. So I think that's of some interest, because we've heard that before. Sargon the Great establishes this Akkadian Empire, really interesting, because imagine he establishes the first, that we know of, postal system. So my little clay tablet or my little roll of papyrus, I want to send it to someone down the river, and so I'm going to entrust it to you, and then you take it and deliver it. I mean, the concept of a postal system, over almost 5,000 years ago is pretty impressive. So the Akkadian Empire is from what is modern day Iraq all the way down to the Arabian Peninsula. This is a pretty big area, and so how do you keep track of these areas as these empires are growing bigger and bigger? You have to have, first and foremost, you have to have sufficient irrigation for crops for people to eat. You have to have transportation, facility of trade, so that people can prosper and trade whatever they don't use for themselves or whatever they don't have to pay as tribute. So Sargon the Great is credited with setting up the first empire of humankind that we know of. There may have been some before that we just don't have records of, but the Akkadian Empire is the first. The greatest of the ancient empires is, of course, the Persian Empire. And so the Persian Empire is around 600, 500 BC, so it's several thousand years after the Akkadian, and it reaches its epoch under Cyrus the Great. And Cyrus the Great is a fascinating man. Let me tell you why. First, there were dreams that he would take over his grandfather and father's kingdoms, and so it is said that he was placed on a river and found by a shepherd and raised, and then came back to eventually take the power from his grandfather. So this foretelling of greatness and this having been raised in humble origins is something that we see again and again in origin stories of the great leaders of the ancient world. So Cyrus is the first ruler to unite all of the people, all of the different Persian tribes, and he is able to expand. So as he conquers lands around him, his empire goes literally from the Aegean Sea, in other words, from Greece, all the way to the Indus River in India, from the Caspian Sea in the north, all the way down through to the Gulf states. This is a huge territory. So Cyrus the Great is able to set up a structure, a bureaucracy that's going to allow him to oversee such an immense territory. I mean, literally from Egypt all the way to what is currently Pakistan. Just huge expanse of land. And he was considered kind of an ideal ruler. He was very tolerant. He was very measured. He learned from his subjects as new territories came into being. If there were ideas that worked, he would just incorporate them into his system. What a concept. Nimble type of government. He was seen as the father of the Persian people. He is considered the greatest ruler that ever ruled that area. And so he's a fascinating figure in ancient history. And you can imagine, in order to rule over dozens and dozens of different peoples and languages and religious beliefs and cultures, you would have to be tolerant. And he was. Herodotus, the famous Roman historian, says he was held in very high esteem and was kind of seen as the ideal monarch for millennia. Cyrus is seen as the epitome of what a ruler should be. someone that focuses on the prosperity of his people, on the stability of the rule of law so that people are safe. So really interesting, and so that's really the focus of the video today. When Cyrus the Great captures Babylon, that is what encapsulates today Greater Iraq, Greater Syria, and Greater Palestine. And so again, we're talking about swaths of territory that are so vast, it takes months and months for people to traverse from one side to the other. And he was able to hold it, as were his descendants, for several hundred years, which is pretty impressive when you think about it. In terms of the Western world, it was probably, I don't know, half the territory of what was known then. Definitely a man who inspired Alexander. He was known to be one of Alexander the Great's kind of icons, and so it's always interesting. His impact is so compelling even today that I feel that he's one of the figures that is not as well known as he should be. And so I'm hoping that a little bit of information I share with you today will allow people to learn a little bit more about this great man. In 1971, Iran celebrated the 2500th, in other words, 2500th anniversary of the founding of the Persian Empire by Cyrus the Great. It was said that the Shah spent just exorbitant sums on this event, and that there were more members of all of the European or world monarchy and heads of state that have ever come together in any event. A huge celebration, not sure best use of resources for a country that had poverty and other levels that needed to be addressed, but it was said to be the event of our lifetime at that point in time in 1971 because of how ostentatious everything was, the recreation of Cyrus and the different groups that were in part of his empire. And now for my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. The three books that I'm going to recommend today all have to do with the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great, because much more is known about the Persian Empire than the Akkadian and Sumerian in terms of actual sources. So again, three very different books. The first book is by Amanda Podani. It is called Weavers, Scribes, and Kings. And the interesting part of this book is that it is told through personal stories. So historical events are told through the eyes of people that are fictional, of course, but she engages you and you feel like you're living the history of the Persian Empire through the stories that are told in her book. It's a great read. You'll enjoy this. And it's a way to learn history without just reading history because it's basically storytelling. And as always, check your local library. These are recent books. I think all three of them are published in 2022. So local library, local booksellers. We love our libraries. We love our local booksellers. We want to support them. Check with them first. And we always leave links in the description box below in order for you to purchase them if you'd like, new or used, from independent booksellers. The second book is called Persians, The Age of Great Kings. This is really interesting because this book, the sources are also from Iran, and we don't get a lot of sources from inside Iran. And so I think this book is well worth it because of that. It really talks about Persia as the first superpower and what makes a superpower and what are the elements and what are the historical occurrences during the time of the Persian Empire. So it really worthwhile reading if you're interested in this subject matter and want to go a little bit deeper. Highly recommend it. The third book is called King of the World, The Life of Cyrus the Great by Matt Waters. And this book is really accessible. Matt Waters uses a lot of sources, a lot of ancient sources, and so it's really authoritative. It's a book that really delves deep into the life of Cyrus the Great and his impact on the ancient world and also on the world that we know today. So highly recommend it. Again, if this is something of interest to you, really recommend you check this book out. So thank you so much, as always, for coming to the end of the video with me. This joint journey is something that I enjoy doing very much, and I hope that you enjoy as well. We would love you to subscribe to Latina Literati, and we'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you're reading, what you're interested in, and what you'd like us to present, because we have in the past and we will in the future present topics that you suggest, that our community suggests. So as always, con mucho cariño, mucho salud, mucho amor. Gracias.